Hello there, this is Debbie Heiser, and I am so stinking excited to share this new season 4 with you. And I can't believe that this is already the 4th season of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. And I just want to thank each of you who listen. And my hope is that the tools, the thoughts and experiences I share, as well as the work I've done to love myself, love others, and love the work I'm called to do, that also helps me lead a truly lit up life, will help you move into a more lit up life yourself. A few things to look for in this season. Super excited to share that we're going to be coming to you now every week with episodes jam-packed with information to serve you. Every other week, you'll hear from a guest who's leading a life that they love, and I'll be asking them to share their stories, how they got there, and any thoughts or advice that they can give you, our loyal listeners. We have new music too, and I'm so thrilled to introduce this song called Ride, sung and co-written by my friend, Miss Jackie Wilson. And she, along with her collaborators, Tyler Banks, David DJ Lee, and Chris Renee, are super talented and generous, as this song fits perfectly into the thought of stepping into your best life. To follow any or all of these talented folks, check out the show notes for their social handles. Thanks again for listening. Enjoy season 4 and do us a solid and leave us a rating and a comment to help us be able to share more with people across the globe. Now, let's get started with this episode.
You're the only one who really can transform your mind.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead Your Lit Up Life with Debbie Heiser. And I am super excited today to introduce you to Allison Williams. Allison and I met through my business coach and her coach at the time at an event. And we've kind of periodically had some high level conversations, but not really gotten into a deep conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this, what's going to happen today in the podcast. I've been watching Allison from afar, she and her two, it's parrots, right? Yeah, her two parrots on social media and what she's doing. And she is when I look at someone that's leading a lit up life, I see Allison, because just the things that you're doing, Allison, and I'm so excited to have this opportunity to share with the listeners kind of what you've done to help yourself do that. I'm going to let you introduce yourself from a professional standpoint. And so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself.
All right.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you, and I'm really excited to talk to your audience, because I think we're going to be able to share some insights based on our collective work together. So about me, I am the owner of Williams Law Group. I've been an family law attorney for 18 years. And started a law firm, didn't really know what I was doing, had to figure it out, had to go through a lot of trauma associated with growing very rapidly, but learned the process of systematizing a law firm and ultimately got everything to the point where it runs without me and now requires about 5 hours of my week. And it took me about 3.5 years to get us into multi-million-dollar status. And by the time I was there and had nothing else to do really, because it didn't require too much of my time anymore, I decided to help other lawyers to do the same thing. So therein lies my second business, Law Firm Mentor, which is a business coaching service. We help solo and small law firm attorneys to grow their revenues, crush chaos in business, and make more money. And we do that currently in over 30 states, and we help right now about 50 different practice areas. So we have a very, very diverse clientele across the country of lawyers that are typically anywhere from that solopreneur just starting to a small team, anywhere from 10 to 20 people. We have clients that are $100,000 businesses. We have clients well over $1 million and still growing. So we ultimately can help anyone in that space. And that's where I find my joy and passion now in that business, which I tend to work in a little bit more than 5 hours a week. It's more of a full-time job, but it's a labor of love, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, and I love that you crush chaos. That's such a great terminology for any business, not just a law firm. So thank you for sharing that. And I want to go back and if you think about, well, first of all, let's go back, and 3.5 years, multi-million, that's fantastic. Businesses within the 2-year range, they either fail or they succeed. And so hats off to you, because that is no small achievement. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what continues to happen with your mentoring job or your mentoring business as well. So I want to go back, and sometimes it's hard for us to go back to this, but I want you to think about, like, you graduated, you were starting to practice law. Like, what made you decide that you wanted to grow the way you did? And tell us a little history. Like, did you work for a firm and then decide to go off on your own? Like, what were those decision points that happened for you?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you. I never wanted to or even conceptualize the idea of owning my own law firm. I was kind of your classic lawyer. I went to law school. I expected to work for someone else and did work for someone else. I worked for 3 different law firms ultimately throughout my career before I started my own. And I'll tell you, the second law firm where I worked, which was where I say I kind of grew up as a lawyer, I grew very rapidly because that firm was also a rapid growth law firm. And I had to learn a lot faster than I was prepared to, but that was great because I stepped into my power, if you will, as a lawyer, got to be a very successful lawyer, developed a statewide reputation, and then ultimately had it out with somebody in my office and I was fired. And through the process of being fired, I wasn't fired and like escorted from the building, but I was basically told your time here is no more and go find something else. And I went to a law firm where by that time I knew my worth, I knew what I was capable of as an attorney, but I was jaded and I was, nervous about people. And I said, well, I'm not going to rely on an employer. By the time that I was fired from the previous place, I had a book of business of about $250,000. So in theory, I intellectually understood that if I left and went and started my own law firm, I could support myself, I could pay the bills, etc. But for me, I was very much oriented by status. I was very concerned with what other people would think of me. And I associated really good lawyers being affiliated with a law firm, not being the solopreneur who's off doing it on their own. Kind of the hunt and scrappy, right?
Yeah, that's a big mind shift that you had to go through. Yeah.
And so I didn't really go through it, if you will, until the next place where I worked, where I was treated very well. I'm still very friendly with my mentor. Actually, I'm very friendly with the boss that fired me as well. It's kind of a long story how we made up. But my last employer, wonderful guy, just he and his partners were they just weren't the same type. They didn't have the same type of mindset that I did. They took a long time to make decisions. There was a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of back and forth of debating. And I said, these things are pretty simple. I had grown to the point where I was generating so much work that I couldn't get to my own work, let alone help my employer. So I said, it's time for us to hire somebody. And I said, if you want me to, I will train that person. I'll take full responsibility for making sure that lawyer is ethically compliant, learns everything that we need to learn, but I'm not going to do that as your employee. I'll do that as your partner. And I called the question, and my boss, who I went to, said, "Oh, that's a great idea. You've added so much value, and we appreciate you, and what have you." And then he went and talked to his partners, and he came back to me, and he didn't say no, but he kind of waffled, and I was just so offended by the idea that he waffled. Especially because here's the crazy thing, the thing that I didn't mention that I usually tend to work into the story. I am a recovering alcoholic, and over probably about 3 years of maybe 2 years of the time that I was there, I was actively drinking. And once I got to realize, okay, this is not healthy. I'm obviously going to cause danger or harm to someone else or myself if I don't stop this. I actually went to them and said, listen, I know you probably have noticed that I've been scattered and not quite here and not really interested or whatever. Here's what's going on. I need to get some help. And I completely understand if you don't want to take that risk on. And they were wonderful about it. They said, listen, we know that you're human. We think that you're wonderful. We want to help you. We want to support you during this. You got to do what you got to do, but we will be here for you. So they actually were great during that time of my life. But then I looked back. This was probably a year and a half after I got completely sober. And I went to them and I said, not for nothing, but I was billing more hours when I was an active alcoholic than many of the people that work in this law firm. And I was still generating cases, and I was still speaking throughout the state, and I was still bringing you this big reputation. That's the very least you can do is give me a title. I didn't even want more money. I just wanted a title.
Right.
And the fact that there was any equivocation about that just offended me. So I said, all right, well, you guys continue to think about it, and I'll be over here. and I was going to a national conference. I was just admitted into the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, which is,
congratulations.
thank you. It was a very prestigious national organization. I was the youngest attorney in New Jersey ever to have accomplished that. I was the only Black attorney to ever accomplish that in our state. And I said, okay, I'm getting all these firsts here and your law firm is associated with it. If I don't have a title, just know that when I go to this national conference, I don't intend to associate myself as being your employee, because people in this organization are the ones that are making the law. They're not the ones who are working for people who are working in the law.
Right.
So my boss said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, that means what it means. You figure it out. And when I came back from the conference, he was like, are you still working for us? I said, yeah, of course I'm still working for you. And then of course I gave my notice like a month and a half later. And then proceeded off on my own, me and 43 clients. Every single one of my clients wanted to come with me. 5 of them, I said, you can't come with me. But
I bet that conversation went well.
Well, it was more for their best interest. It was more like, don't pay a whole new retainer and start your matter over again when I'm stressed and overwhelmed. Stay here and let somebody wrap up your last few negotiations or what have you. But the 43 that I took with me, I also planned to have a secretary. My secretary said yes, she was coming with me, and then she said no after I gave notice. So I suddenly had to go hire someone while I'm transitioning. And I gave notice with a 3-week window to say, let's transition it in a way that doesn't harm the clients, that doesn't harm your financial interests, that doesn't harm me. They said yes, and then they put me out a week later. So then I am suddenly unearthed with no physical office, with no staff, having to manage 43 cases at that time in 12 counties in New Jersey. And, you know, you had to figure it out. And that was very traumatic and stressful. And I had to get a lot of help. So I started working with business coaches. And that's really how I started to change the way that I was thinking about business and, you know, change the idea that I had to be the one solely responsible for everything. And just a lot of mindset shifts during that time in my life, and ultimately got control of me. And because I had to work so hard to get control of me, I now have an intuitive gift of being able to talk to other people about that and help them get control of themselves so they can be successful.
Yeah, Allison, I'm so glad you brought that up, because to me, that's such the core crux of what we both teach, right? Like when we coach, that we have to be self-aware and we have to understand and be in control of ourselves. And in order for anything really to work, whether that be personal or business, you know, it'll work, but not at a lit up type of situation, right? So thank you for sharing all of that. And thank you for sharing about your sobriety too. Congratulations. How many years now?
Thanks. It will be 10 years in January.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Ironically, it feels like forever, but it also feels like yesterday.
Yeah. I understand that. I understand that. And so tell me too about like what you're doing now with this mentorship and helping people get rid of the chaos, helping people learn basically from your mistakes that you learned and from the successes that you had as well. And so what lights you up about that?
Well, the beautiful thing about it is I will share that probably is the thing that gives me the most fulfillment in life, is that when you can look at somebody and see how hopeless, how scared, how tired, how exhausted that they are, and you can put yourself in those shoes as if it was just like yesterday, it becomes very easy to see your way out of it, right? And so when you talk to someone, like even when I think back on my own journey, I'll think back on why it was so stressful at the very beginning. And most people would recognize, hey, if you have 43 people to service as a business owner, you have too much work for one person, right? That never occurred to me, right? Because when I was working for someone else, sometimes I'd handle 40 cases, sometimes I'd handle 60 cases. And if that meant coming in at 5 in the morning and not leaving until midnight and working on the weekends and skipping the holidays, that's what it meant. Because I was so driven about being successful that, you know, that was just kind of the cost of admission to play on this playground. But I realized that as a business owner, I was having to learn a whole bunch of new skills that I didn't know. So lawyering 60 hours a week would tire me, but not tire me out. It wouldn't run me down. Lawyering, as well as trying to figure out how to negotiate a lease, how to hire a person, how to assess contracts and proposals that were being submitted to me, how to hire a marketing company. All of those things were completely new. And there is a greater energy expenditure when you are learning new skills. That's why kids can be tired when they come home from school, because they learned all day. That actually is active release of energy. And so just knowing that and helping people to see that you are taking on too much and you have more capacity than you realize to give work to other people, to have them generate wealth. And the greatest thing is that it's actually easier, even when you hire someone mediocre who you don't like. It is easier to have that person doing some work with you and for you to focus on infrastructure and building out your system than it is for you to try to be the full-time technician and the full-time business owner and the full-time marketing agent and the full-time resource. I mean, it's chaos how much lawyers believe that we can take on ourselves and believe that we can still be effective. And that's the reason why lawyers can be in business and have never learned how to produce $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 by themselves, and then be surprised when they're not able to produce it by themselves when they also have a full-time job as a business owner and a full-time job as a technician in the business. So there's so many times where I can think back and say, geez, if I was advising myself now, I'd say, yeah, you have enough work for 2 associates and a paralegal when you left your law firm. You have way too much on your plate. And by doing that, you can have $1 million law firm in 1 year, as opposed to the 2.5 years it took me to get to the first million. But hindsight is 2020, right?
Right.
I can't struggle anymore, so it's easy to see it, which is the reason why it's so easy to see it when I look at my clients. I can see where they're going wrong. I can almost invariably hear kind of that running ticker tape in their head that's saying, it's got to be me. It's going to cost me money to hire somebody, and I can't afford that. And all the things that I remember used to run through my head that I can think back now and say, God, that was stupid. It really was. But I can say it with a level of empathy toward my clients because I know what they're going through.
Right. Well, and how wonderful, because it's almost as if you're giving them the lens of hindsight. Right? Like that's part of the gift that you're giving them is, here's what I learned in hindsight, and now I'm sharing with you to be able to do that. So do you find, so now where you're at and you're in the mentoring role too, and in this coaching role, do you ever find, well, I'm setting this up as a yes and no question, but what type of obstacles do you find yourself running into now? Because we all go through these experiences where we level up. And when I say level up, I'm not just meaning from a financial perspective, but from our thought processes into owning our personal power, into all of those things. But there's always those squirrels that kind of run around, right? And still sometimes we'll block up against them or grind up against them. And I don't know about you, but I see them a lot quicker than I used to. But tell me, what are some things today that you still kind of rub up against?
Yeah, well, so I love this question. I really do. So what I will say to just kind of frame the answer is that you never escape being yourself, right? You master some of your patterns. You recognize when you're about to do something that is a little bit off of the grid or that's going to send you down the wrong path. You start to see it, but you're still who you are, right? Until you completely work things out of your system. So, I have patterns and I have ways of thinking that are well-worn neural pathways that I had to do a lot of work on to eradicate. And now some of them are completely gone. Some of them are still here though, right? Because if they weren't that problematic in the past, because I was working on other parts of myself, they're still a part of me, and then they show up in this business. So I'll kind of use the example of people. So most people that meet me would think that I'm an extrovert, but that's actually very much not true. I'm very much an introvert. I very much go into my head. I am much more about my head than my heart. And I like people. In fact, I love people. I have a high amount of empathy. I've actually been referred to as an empath. But because I'm an empath, I actually seclude myself from people because people take my energy. Even when they're just being social, friendly, doing their work, they're not being energy vampires per se, but they're just being human. And the energy that it takes for me to emotionally connect, engage, be available to another person takes so much from me that I am typically going to find that I'm my best self when I'm by myself. So now, having built a business, having built a multi-million-dollar law firm, and now also a multi-million-dollar coaching business for lawyers, I know that people skills are one of the things that you have to master in order to have other people do work alongside you, not do work for you. So in other words, instead of putting it on my plate and then taking it off and giving it to someone else, which by the way does trigger feelings of loss and abandonment. So a lot of people have struggles with delegation as a business owner. Instead of even putting myself in that frame, I hire people and say, we need X. This is your responsibility. So it never comes on my plate in the first place, other than when it's time to write the check, right? So my team knows, like, you have a zone, right? We all have a zone of genius. But in order for that zone of genius to be furthered, for that person to grow in their role, to feel that they are free to create in their space, I do have to be available. So I will oftentimes want to get something done yesterday. And when I'm thinking the way I used to think, which is still something I have to stop myself from doing, I'd say, great, I want to create something, let's go do it. And my executive assistant, Nina, is great at being very diplomatic in explaining to people that you can't always take what Allison says and runs with it. So when she gives you an instruction, run it by me first, and I'll tell you whether or not we're really going to do that. And she's great about that, because I will wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, oh my God, yes, there's this exciting thing out there and we've got to seize it now. And I'll send like a 40-page email saying, all right, it's Wednesday. By Friday, I want these 19 things done. And then I want the other 21 things done by the end of Tuesday. And then we can launch this big thing on Friday. And then everyone who gets that email like freaks the F out. Yeah. And it's like, how are we going to fit that in with all the other things? And where does it go? And the beautiful thing about Nina is that she will kind of rein me in and say, okay, now remember that conversation we had about what's doable and what's acceptable, right? This is doable. Is it acceptable? Are we going to derail another project, another process, a person's mental well-being by virtue of putting all of these activities on them when they have 70 other things that take priority? Let's figure out where this fits. The answer is not no. The answer may be not now. Let's talk about it. And because she can have that conversation with me and she knows how to work me, right. Manage me, I am very free, and I tell her all the time, listen, tell me no if this is not going to work, right? Or if this is going to put too much stress on the company. But there's a disconnect, right? Because I'm so used to doing things by myself. And so I am still growing in and will probably always combat that inner urge to think a big idea and just kind of plop it down and say, all right, we got to get it done. And that is something that I struggle with. And it's another thing to realize how much power you have when you speak. There'll be times as a leader that I still think of myself as just Allison. So yeah, it can be as simple as in my law firm sometimes. Right now, most of us are working virtually, but periodically we'll have people that choose on a rotation that just come in. It'll be a lot of people in the office. And I'll just come out and say, all right, guys, we're all here. Why don't we have lunch together? Everyone's like, oh, sure. And I'd be like, okay, what do you want to eat? Well, I don't know. What do you want to eat? And I'll say, oh, I don't know. We could do Chinese, we could do Mexican, we could do American. But because I said Chinese first, everybody all of a sudden wants Chinese. And we'll get the food and we'll order and we'll sit down and I'll be like, oh, the Mexican place would have been so much better. Oh, I really wanted Mexican. I was hoping you were going to say Mexican. I was like, well, I threw out Mexican as an option. Well, but you said you wanted Chinese. No. I said, let's just choose anything. But because people have this deference to me as the boss, as the leader, when I say something, it has more weight. So I actually have to be very strategic and I have to stop myself from just kind of blurting things out and say, okay, what do I want to accomplish here? I want people to feel included. I want to make sure everyone is heard. So that may mean that I intentionally have to speak last so that it doesn't influence what people say in response to a request. Or it may mean that I have to directly solicit someone who's not inclined to speak at all. And those skills are always things that I have to be very intentional about making sure that I do because they're just not intuitive to me.
Yeah, and Allison, thank you for bringing that up. Actually, both things, because I call that the entrepreneurial spirit, right? We come up with these great ideas. Entrepreneurs love to have these ideas and then they need people to go execute on them. But we tend to get bored too when it gets to the maintenance stage of it. And that's why it's so important to have somebody ground you like you have in your secretary. And then when it comes to words are so important as a leader, and we don't understand sometimes the impact of the words and that we think of ourselves as people, like you were saying, but then when we're with our team or those people that we're leading, they do put us in a different category. And so they're looking to see which direction we want to go. And words are so critical and so important when it comes to leadership. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, if you had to give one piece of advice to the listeners, what would be the biggest piece of advice for them?
Oh God, there's so many things out there. So the thing that probably helped me the most when I was going through the process of building the first business, and even as I've always harkened back to this, even in building the second business, is that you have to always be mindful that you are creating, whether you are doing that intentionally or you're doing that unintentionally. And for a lot of people, they come to work, they work every day, and they're concerned about the thing that is the raise of the business, right? The asset, the thing that you sell, the thing that you went into business for to produce. So for my clients, it's law, right? They want to be lawyers. And they think about the lawyering and they put a lot of heart and soul into the lawyering, but you're always going to create the pattern of thinking that exists within you until you are intentional about changing that pattern of thinking. And changing that pattern of thinking doesn't happen overnight. You don't just sit down and say, I'm going to think a new thought, and then poof, you have a different outcome, because you're always creating from your instinct, and your instinct is wired to the old thoughts. So I always tell people that you have to start to integrate activity together with your new thoughts in order that you congeal those new thoughts with something concrete that you can refer back to. And if you think about that, every time that you're doing something, you have to be very intentional. How am I thinking about this? How am I going to approach this? What is the outcome that I desire? And if you ended up with an outcome that you didn't desire, more often than not, it's because of how you thought about it or how you approached it. And if you realize that, there's a great deal of freedom that comes with business, because every time you do something, you can change the way you think about it and you can change the approach. You can't change the outcome, however, from what most of us try to do, which is change the thing that was immediately before the outcome, right? We try to go right to that last action step instead of where it all generates, which is within our thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. That's good stuff. And goes back to that whole like reprogramming your brain and putting it into action and realizing we're all first cause. Right, yeah. That we all have that choice to change the mindset. So, Allison, if somebody were wanting to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about what you're doing, and potentially hire you to come into their firm, how should they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can always find us on our website, which is lawfirmmentor.net. And I always tell people, if you want to have an experience of what it is to work with Law Firm Mentor, we have a free course that we run. It runs periodically throughout the year, and our next one starts on October 18th. So if by the airing of this, that one has passed, there will be one in December as well. It's called our masterclass, and we actually teach you how to systematize a law business. So you get the feeling of what it is to learn my teaching style, recognize some of the principles that we talk about that really run through all strains of your business. And I tell people that's probably the best way to get an experience of us, so that you know what it would be like if you were to ultimately come into our coaching community. And that you can find out more about at lawfirmmentor.net/masterclass.
Perfect. Allison, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to dig in and talk more about how you're leading your lit up life and jumping into and doing that which feeds your soul and gives you joy. And so I thank you for your time today. And for those of you listening, if you'd like to get in touch with me and learn a little bit more about what I do and how I can help you as an entrepreneur, please go out to www.leadyourlituplife.com and click on that little button that says get a free consult. That's how that always goes. So anyway, with that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.